Welcome to the Non-Sequitur Show. Continual watching beyond this point may result in terminal face palming and a complete loss of wokeness. You have been warned.
Hi, welcome back to another episode of Non-Sequitur Show. I have something amazing today. I've had this gentleman back on my channel many times. However, not particularly on this particular topic. So I'm really enthused about this because usually we're talking about evolution and things of that nature. But today I have Dr. Hugh Ross from Reasons to Believe to discuss the distant starlight problem, which is one of my favorite arguments against Young Earth Creationism. So I brought in an expert and a friend of mine, Dr. Hugh Ross. Welcome. Oh, wait, did you unmute? I can't hear you. Did you unmute?
Now I'm unmuted.
There we go. Awesome. Anyways, welcome back to it. Well, it's been a while since you've been on the Non-Sequitur Show.
Yes, it's been a while. Good to see you again.
Yes, always a pleasure. So let's kind of just dive into this. I know we have only an hour, so we're going to make the most of it. If the live chat wants to join in and ask questions, by all means, we'll do that as we go. But there are some specific things we did want to talk about. Make sure that you guys can hear me, can hear him, and audio's good, and we'll kind of go from there. But what we want to dive in today is basically one of the things that Young Earth Creationists bring up quite frequently to try to resolve some of the problems with the Young Earth Creationist model is what's called the distant starlight problem. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Hugh here and have him kind of describe to you what the distant starlight problem is and how Jason Lisle kind of tries to go about resolving it, so to speak.
Well, a distant starlight problem is the fact that we have galaxies and stars billions of light years away, and given a finite velocity of light, it must take billions of years for that light to travel from those distant galaxies to our telescopes here on Earth. And Young Earth Creationists over the years have come up with 9 workarounds to try to get past this starlight problem. I mean, probably the most famous one is to say, well, the velocity of light was much faster in the past than it is today. But that contradicts astronomical measurements. We look at hyperfine split spectral lines, we're measuring the velocity of light, and that tells us that the velocity of light has not changed over the entire extent of the universe, therefore the past history of the universe. And so today, probably the 2 most popular attempts to escape the dilemma of a distant starlight, distant galaxy light is one by Russell Humphreys and the other one by Jason Lisle. Russell Humphreys, again, appeals to gravitational time dilation. And so he appeals to the theory of general relativity and has written papers over the years, and a number of them have been published in the Journal of Creation. That's a Young Earth Creationist scientific journal. And so we've actually engaged him in that journal, basically pointing out that he made a mathematical error. And when you correct the mathematical error, you wind up with a Big Bang universe that's billions of years old. As far as I know to this day, Russ Humphreys still denies that he made a mathematical error. And he claims that, me and my colleagues, Sam Connor, and especially Don Page, we recruited Don Page from the University of Alberta, Edmonton. He's one of the world's foremost experts in the theory of general relativity. And we showed him Russ Humphreys' work, and where it took Sam and I an hour or two to find the mathematical error, because Don is fluent in general relativity, he spotted it within seconds. So we included him in one of the articles. But again, Russ's approach was to say, Don doesn't know what he's talking about. I haven't made an error. And incidentally, this isn't unique to Russ. I remember when Fred Hoyle gave a talk at Caltech trying to promote a new version of his steady state model for the universe. And he was about 20 minutes into his presentation when one of the graduate students in the audience put his hand up and said, Sir Fred, there's a mathematical error there. You got the wrong sign on the equation. And if you correct the sign, the universe is no longer a steady state. And, I was at that meeting, and for the next 40 minutes, Fred denied that he made the error and basically said that the graduate student made the error. But there were 300 of us in the audience. Almost all of us had PhDs in astronomy and physics. And we all agreed with a graduate student, but we couldn't get Fred Hoyle to make the concession. So I just want to make the point, it's not just young Earth creationists that behave this way. Sometimes really famous scientists do as well.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that way, because I just had recently, I don't know if you had a chance to watch it, but I had two very brilliant scientists on, Dr. Hinkie and Dr. Lisle on, and they point out the same thing about Dr. Humphreys. I had correspondence with Dr. Humphreys for a very, very long time. We had correspondence going back and forth when it came to the rate project and helium diffusion rates and things of that nature. And in one of his articles in the journal that you mentioned, which I would never call a scientific journal, but I get it, I get what you're saying, but a journal of creation, he made a math error. I mean, it was a fundamental math error. It wasn't anything requiring advanced understanding of tensor calculus. It was just basic algorithms that he made a mistake on. Later on down the line, like 2 years later, I think he finally had to admit that he did make a math error, not publicly, but he, like you said, they refuse to make the most simplest concessions. And the problem is, though, when you're dealing with science and you're dealing with math, these things are objective. Anybody with the skill set can look and go, oh, look, there's a mistake. And as you said, even brilliant people like Hoyle can make common signage errors. I was watching a Susskind video, and Susskind, who I just think is one of the greatest scientists of all time, he had some, small little errors on the board, and people were pointing out. I'm like, yeah, I saw like, wait a minute, he means this, and I was thinking, okay, is my understanding wrong? Because he's a Susskind. He's like, oh no, I meant this. I was like, okay, great. But yeah, no, that's a great point that a lot of people, can make these errors and they refuse to admit it. So you were talking about the cosmology that like Humphreys is trying to use in order to resolve this distant starlight problem.
In lay audience, because Humphreys was basically claiming gravitational time dilation using a black hole analogy, claiming the universe came into a black hole, became a white hole. And what I pointed out in my book, A Matter of Days, we can appeal to something that's far simpler. I mean, gravitational time dilation is a feature of the theory of general relativity. Only about 10,000 people in the world are fluent in the mathematics of general relativity.
It's hard. It's very difficult.
But special relativity is high school level mathematics. It's not difficult. And the theory of special relativity, it predicts velocity time dilation. And here we got measurements. I mean, Russ Humphreys was theorizing without any observational base on gravitational time dilation. But when it comes to velocity time dilation, it basically appeals to E equals mc squared and makes the point that the faster you move, the slower your clock will go. And when in an expanding universe, if you look at galaxies far away, they're moving relative to us at a significant fraction of the velocity of light, which means events in those galaxies will take longer in time. Now, Humphreys was trying to speed things up by a factor of 1 billion times or 1 million times. But if you go to special relativity, it basically predicts supernova eruption events in distant galaxies will take maybe 10 or 11 months to go through their light cycle, as opposed to 7 months in our galaxy. Well, guess what? We astronomers have got dozens of observations where we see that velocity time dilation, which is basically the opposite of what Russ Humphreys was predicting, that instead of the clock speeding up, the clock slowed down. And so I remember I've debated him publicly several times. And whenever I do, he tries to get me off the observational tests and back to the mathematics. And we're always debating in front of a lay audience. And it's like, wait a minute, you and I understand tensor calculus, but nobody in our audience does. but they do understand observations of supernova eruption events. Let's go there, because now we got a definitive test to see who's right and who's wrong. But that's something I've noticed in the Young Earth Creationist crowd, is that they like to dismiss the observational tests and go back to their mathematics. Another good example of that is Jason Lisle, because he's come up with this idea, well, maybe the velocity of light is infinite towards the observer and half the velocity of light away from the observer. And he is correct that we scientists are not able to measure the one-way velocity of light. We measure the two-way, the return path. But his claim is, and when I did the first debate with him, it says, aha, what he is saying is that the velocity of light is infinite towards the center of the Earth and half the velocity of light when it's going away from the center of the Earth. But in my most recent debate with him, I said, well, wait a minute. We got the James Webb Space Telescope 1 million miles away. That's not the center of the Earth. And so we got telescopes on the Earth making observations, and we got the James Webb Telescope. And said, oh, no. But I'm saying it's infinite towards all observers, whether it's a human being, a telescope, no matter where it is in the universe. And that's why a number of theologians have pointed out that Jason Lisle is engaging in what they call hyper-presuppositionalism. And he himself admits that he's a presuppositionalist. To him, data, observations doesn't count. What really counts is your philosophical model. But if you appeal to his model, it'd be like me saying, you know what, Steve? You're really not near my age. You're really only 4 years old, and all that memory you have in your head,
I'm okay with that.
got planted there. You think you're, 50 years of age. You're really not.
I'm north of there.
You're 4 years old, or you're a teenager.
I'm okay with that. Let's go back to being teens again.
Well, that's what hyper-presupposition is all about. You're basically saying we don't have to appeal to natural phenomena or data. And as I've written in a number of my books, what's happening with these young Earth creationists, they're engaging in a philosophy known as Gnosticism, where they're saying the measurements of the real world don't count. What counts is their theoretical model. And the ironic thing about that is young Earth creationists take pride in interpreting the Bible literally. And the Bible literally attacks Gnostic philosophy. It's in the book of Colossians, the book of Galatians. And so Paul, for example, is scathing in his attack on Gnostic philosophy. And yet we have elements of the Christian community engaging the very thing that the Bible condemns. And the Bible is also quite clear that we can trust the record of nature. We can trust the measurements that we're making. That God has given us two books, the book of Scripture and the book of nature, and both are utterly reliable and trustworthy. And therefore, we have a problem integrating our science with our theology. It's because we've misinterpreted one or the other, or in some cases, even both. And so rather than diss the book of nature, the Bible actually says the book of nature is one of God's trustworthy revelations. And that's where I do appreciate some honesty in the 2-volume rate study. I know you discussed that with Gary when you had him on. But what's interesting when you look at the rate study is that you have this team of, I think it's 9 or 10 young Earth creationist scientists spending 8 years trying to find some scientific way of explaining how the universe and the Earth could be thousands of years old. But they're making very significant concessions in the work. They say that the laws of physics have been constant over the history of the Earth and the universe, then both the universe and the Earth must be several billions of years old. But then they appeal to accelerated radioactive decay. They're basically saying the laws of physics have not been constant. But here again is where I would go to the Bible and say, look at what Jeremiah 33 says. God is basically lecturing the Jews and saying, You change your mind all the time. But I'm immutable. I'm a God that never changes. As proof, look to the laws that govern the heavens and the earth. As they have never changed, I have never changed. And that's one of 8 places I could cite in the Bible where it tells us the laws of physics have been constant since the time that God created the universe. And by the own words that you see in the rate study, therefore the universe and the earth must be billions of years old.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that repeatedly that in the rate study, they did concede that the Earth appears to be billions of years old. They conceded that radiometric dating does make those kind of observations. And I love the way you pointed out that Young Earth Creationists tend to deny observations. They want to go by their presuppositions, and they even sign statements of faith that any science that disagrees with their Young Earth Creationist model must be discounted by fiat. There is no argument. It's just wrong, according to them, which is not how you do science. Science is well, there are, experimental sciences, but there are also observational science as astronomy. And so right. I love the way you put, like the asynchronous convention as being, it's a philosophical argument. I don't think it's even an argument. It's just a presupposition that he has or tries to use, which in my opinion is non-parsimonious. For the people in the audience, what Dr. Ross was basically saying was, Einstein basically said, hey, look, clocks, when they try to synchronize each other, we have this convention that light travels uniformly in all vectors. In all directions, light goes the same speed, c. It doesn't change with respect to the observer. But by the way, did Lisle change that? Because he used to say, like you said, light incoming to Earth would be traveling on an asynchronous rather than asynchronously rather than isosynchronously. That light came to us at infinite speed. So we're seeing the universe as is, and then light leaving us is half of the value of c, which is just fine. I mean, it works out mathematically, but it doesn't seem very parsimonious. But did he change that when he brought up the Webb space set?
Yes, he changed his model. Okay. He had to change the model
to the observer, no matter where they're in the universe. How does that work?
Well, astronomers found a very distant supernova eruption that was gravitationally lensed by a cluster of galaxies between us and the distant supernova eruption. Mm-hmm. And because the structure of the cluster of galaxies, the bending of light was different at different parts of the cluster of galaxies. Mm-hmm. So astronomers here on Earth were able to witness the single supernova eruption at 3 different epochs. Mm-hmm. Because in one case, you got the beam of light being gravitationally lensed by part of the galaxy cluster that's inner line of sight. Other places, it's upper line of sight, so it takes a bend like this. And so we've got different path lengths coming into the Earth. And that's when Jason Lisle said, I'm not saying the center of the Earth. I'm saying it doesn't matter where the observer is. It doesn't matter whether it's a telescope or an actual human being. And so and then he says, look, you need to understand, I'm a presuppositionalist. So as a presuppositionalist, he is able to alter his model because he begins with a presupposition mm-hmm. that the universe and the Earth are only thousands of years old.
But isn't that ad hoc?
It's totally ad hoc. And so whatever observation comes up that refutes that, he adjusts and changes the model. And so that's something to look for. The scientist is always adjusting the model in the face of conflicting observational evidence, then they're engaging in presuppositionalism.
Yeah, because he starts with that conclusion. He starts that This is the case, and then he tries to retrofit the data to fit his presupposition, which again, to anybody out there, that's not how any scientist should ever work science. Look, I am perfectly fine with a scientist having a hypothesis they want to test, but when the evidence, the actual observational and data shows that their hypothesis is incorrect, they need to just trash that and try something else, not force fit it, because nothing in science has ever come about that way. You had mentioned that James Webb had seen these multiple type of changes due to lensing gravitational forces, but we saw something similar in 1987A with that supernova, which is again 168,000 miles light years away. I'm sorry, 168,000 light years away. The minimum age of the universe has to be 169,000 years. That's the minimum. Just using simple trigonometry, like you said before, the mathematics for general relativity are very, very complicated. But for simple parallax, for simple things like Lorentzian contraction, the math is not that difficult. It's high school level.
It is high school level, but Young Earth Creationists have argued, well, astronomers can't do direct distance measurements based on high school geometry theorems
Why
out beyond
not?
200 light years.
Why not?
That's no longer the case.
Yeah.
We can actually go out as far as 470 million light years, taking advantage of radio telescopes that are located around the world and linking them together as an interferometer. So instead of having, say, a 200-inch telescope, we have a telescope that's 6,000 miles in diameter.
Yeah, they're pretty impressive.
Extraordinary resolving power. And then instead of using the baseline of the orbit of the Earth about the sun, they use the baseline of water masers orbiting about the center of a distant galaxy. And therefore, we can use high school geometry theorems to directly measure distances as far away as 470 million light years, which means, given the constant velocity of light, the universe at a minimum must be 470 million years old. And people say, well, does the velocity of light really have to be constant? I says, well, go back to the equation E equals mc squared. C is the velocity of light. If you accelerate the velocity of light by a factor of 1,000,000 times at the time that God created Adam and Eve, that would make the energy flowing out of the sun be 1,000,000,000,000 times greater than it is today. I think Adam and Eve would have a difficult time surviving in the Garden of Eden with the sun being 1,000,000,000 times brighter than it is today. So just the mere fact that we humans have been on the Earth as long as we have tells us the velocity of light has not changed.
Yeah, and there's also a very well-known formula, 1 divided by the square root of the electric permittivity and the magnetic permeability, which if the speed of light had changed and the fine structure constant had changed, you had mentioned hyperfine line electron orbital changes and the technical stuff, but the reality is that equation is very simple, and what it would say to basically is if the speed of light had changed, how would we have things like atoms? How would we have things that would overcome electrostatics, and how would the strong nuclear force work that way? How would we even have stellar fusion if all of a sudden you start changing these what they call fine tuning? If you start messing with the speed of light, and we look back into the universe, we see these galaxies that are millions and millions and billions of light years away, and we say, oh, look, the speed of light wasn't constant. Now you're changing all these other variables. Wouldn't we be able to notice that if we're looking at it?
We definitely would be able to notice that. And as I mentioned before, we astronomers routinely measure the velocity of light every time we look at hyperfine split spectral lines. And we see them in galaxies and stars all over the universe, which means the velocity of light has never changed. Now, I think it's important for lay people to understand we in astronomy have no access to the present. I keep telling my wife, I can't be held responsible for what's going on right now. All of my data comes from the past.
You're not a presentist?
I don't see it as it is now. I see it as it was 1.5 seconds ago.
We live in the past, essentially speaking. Everything we get is data. Our data sense is antiquated before we even sense it.
However, there is a powerful argument there. We don't infer the past. We directly observe the past. And so we look at the Andromeda Galaxy, we directly see it as it was 2.5 million years ago, because that's when the light left that galaxy and traveled towards our telescope. And what I find incredible is that we astronomers actually have telescopes powerful enough now, we can look back all the way to 100 billionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second after the creation of the universe and see exactly directly what the universe was like at that time. And so we literally can observe virtually 100% of the entire history of the universe. It's not inferred, it's a direct observation.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because Lisle is against God being a deceiver. And people know, look, I'm a non-believer, this is well established, but I have a lot of respect for reasons to believe. Your organization has been amazingly kind to me, and I have the utmost respect for you and Fuzz, and you do know that. But I am a non-believer. But it's so funny because Lisle has said that he doesn't think God is a deceiver, that he doesn't subscribe to anything like the Home-Phallus hypothesis or last Tuesdayism. He discounts Gish. Remember Gish having this argument that light was created in transit, from God, which I think would be deceitful, because then we're not seeing light from an object, we're seeing light from I think he calls it godlight or something. It wouldn't be from the object. It would be deceitful. And yet, if you apply the same standard to the asynchronous convention, how is it any different? God would be kind of deceiving us because we would be seeing light literally as things happen in real time. But it's not even coming from the object at that point. I mean,
to be fair to Jason, he would say that's not deception. What I'm really saying is we can't get any information from observing the universe.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but the Bible tells us explicitly that we can get reliable information. The heavens declare the glory of God. The heavens declare the righteousness of God. The Bible actually commands us to study nature to learn truths from God. And so the idea that the universe is completely unreliable to reveal anything to us, that can't stand up.
Mm-hmm. Have you had a discussion with Dr. Sarfati?
No, he's challenged me to public debates frequently. I said, well, Jonathan, you wrote a book that wasn't very kind towards me. For that,
he's not very kind to anybody. I happen to like the guy. We get along really well, but he's not kind to a lot of people. That is true.
And I said, I'll be happy to debate you, but I want a public apology for what you wrote in your book. And I said, I didn't insult anybody. And so I really don't want to debate someone who's not self-aware. Anyone who reads this book, the insults are right there.
Yeah, no, he's very vitriolic, and look, yeah. I could be vitriolic. I'm on Facebook. I'm known for vitriol. I am not kind. I will fully admit this, because the people I'm dealing with are not people that want to learn. They're not interested in any of this. They're basically promoting just a by fiat narrative that their position is correct, and that's it. And I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in having discussions, especially with people that disagree with me.
You are self-aware.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely.
The problem with Jonathan is that he totally denies that he's doing it.
Oh no, I've known him for quite some time. I've seen a lot of things he's read and said, and he can be quite vitriolic. And I'm sure. I mean, I'm not disbelieving you, but everybody knows he's that way.
In this book, A Matter of Days. So if people want to see a written response, it's in that book, A Matter of Days, the second edition.
The reason I brought him up is because he actually feels the same way. He thinks that Lisle's convention is ad hoc, and I mentioned on creation.com a few times for my arguments. Jonathan happens to like some of the things that I promote, but we disagree obviously on Young Creationism. But he seems like he at least will call out Young Creationists that have bad arguments. He'll tell creationists, look, speciation happens. We have to have speciation even to make the Noah Ark story work. You have to have evolution, so he might call it by a different term, but he definitely says speciation happens. And so he's willing to call Young Creationists out. But when you have people like Jason Lisle, he just seems to be like many other younger creationists, like Georgina Perdue, what her last name? Yeah, she's the same way. It's like, this is the case, and now let's put all anything we can argue out there and see what people want to follow on it, rather than go back and correct their mistakes. Humphreys, for example, has never gone back once and corrected any error that everybody that knows what they're talking about has seen him do. Not one. I've never seen a retraction. Dr. Tompkins from Young Earth Creationism has never put a retraction in for his work, except for one time on his 70% genomic analysis that he had to admit there was a problem in the program he used. Other than that, never have I seen Young Earth Creationists fix anything.
Well, many years ago, I was doing a television debate with Jason Lisle, and he made some incredible statement about the Earth-Moon system that I knew no one watching really understood. So I said, Jason, would you be willing to do a public debate with me in front of a panel of evangelical Christian astronomers?
Oh, God, would
and he said yes, but I couldn't pin him down. For the next 5 years, he kept saying, my schedule's too full, my schedule's too full.
You guys did a written thing, didn't you, back and forth?
And so I said, give me a date 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just give me a date and we'll do it. He wouldn't agree. And this came up in a debate I had with another young Earth astronomer, Danny Faulkner. And Danny Faulkner is a young Earth astronomer I respect.
Yeah.
So in the public debate, a question came from the audience. Hey, Jason Lisle won't do this debate in front of astronomers. How about you, Danny? Will you do it? He agreed. So he and I had a 2-hour television debate in front of a panel of 13 evangelical astronomers that we both agreed would be appropriate to evaluate the debate we had. And you can read on our reasons.org website their one-page evaluation of the outcome of that debate.
Yeah, no, I think it's amazing too that only certain ones will go on and be evaluated by people that know what they're talking about. Like as you said, most of the stuff is so complicated. There's only a handful of people that really understand the maths to any certain degree. For other things, generally the people that watch my show, we're all lay people when it comes to certain topics, and even the topics that my audience has expertise on. In other topics, they're considered to be lay. But you know what? There's certain things that just are not that difficult to understand, and you don't need like these super experts to come in and say, look, your basic high school math is wrong, your geometry is wrong, your trigonometry is wrong. And this is what I'm seeing from Young Earth Creationists. When they make very puerile mistakes, they're still unwilling to correct their mistakes, because they have to put out to the masses that they're right, period. They have to have that we're right no matter what. They can say 1 + 1 = 3, and that has to be right.
Well, for example, I know you had Gary on your show where you talked about helium diffusion. Guess what? Scientists never use helium to date anything. Mm-hmm. It's an extremely elusive molecule. It can just do about anything.
That's very correct. It's not it's not really a dating method. And Gary pointed out, all it does is tell you how much helium's in there. That's all it tells you. It doesn't tell you anything about dating.
Well, as an experimentalist, I've worked with helium. It's the most difficult element to contain. However, and when we do date things, we use things like the amount of lead that's left over, the uranium, the thorium, the plutonium. And those are elements where we don't have any problems with diffusion. Or take a gas, argon. The moon has an atmosphere of argon. And the argon only comes from potassium-40 decay. And the amount of argon in the moon is consistent with the moon being 4.4 billion years old. Likewise, Earth's atmosphere's got 1% argon. That again is consistent with the Earth being almost 4.6 billion years old.
Can you reiterate that for the Young Creationists, that the actual Young Creationist experts all agree that these radiometric datings do work to show an old Earth? That is not even a problem. I mean, they don't disagree with that. By the way, speaking of somebody, and by the way, I did ask your permission for him to join earlier. Look who has decided to join us, Dr. Lisle. Hey, Gary, how you been?
We're just talking about you, Gary, and how Young Earth Creationists like to appeal to helium, the most difficult element in the periodic table to work with and trying to date anything, and yet they ignore argon, they ignore uranium, they ignore lead, they ignore thorium.
Yeah, they ignore all the stuff that actually is used for dating.
That's actually reliable.
Yeah, that's actually reliable. Actually, as you said, though, if for their model to work, the fundamental constants of the universe would have to change. Physics as we know it would have to be so fundamentally different from what we understand that they would have to come up with models that would work. For example, even in Lisle's asynchronous convention, if we're seeing stars the way they are, wouldn't he as an astronomer have to develop theories on how stars formed so quickly, galaxies formed so quickly? I mean, he would have to discount everything we know about observational science.
I've debated Marcus Ross, a Young Earth Creationist, several times. And what I appreciate about Marcus, he realizes that they are facing intractable problems. Mm-hmm. In terms of the flood, they need the radiometric decay rates to accelerate, not just by a factor of 1,000,000 times, but by 1 billion times.
And how much heat would that generate?
We have a lot of potassium in our body, and potassium is a radioactive isotope. You accelerate the potassium decay in your body by a factor of 1 billion times. Guess what happens to your body? It instantly evaporates. And the heat release from accelerating radiometric decay by a factor of 1 billion times would evaporate all the water, would evaporate the planet. Marcus says, yes, that's a problem we face. We don't know how to solve it. But what I've been trying to persuade him is not only is it a problem you face, it's an intractable problem.
It is.
It's a problem without any realistic solution.
They have a special name for that scenario. Solution. Yeah, they have a special name for that scenario. It's called everyone dies. If you're right, everyone dies. Anyways, hey, Gary, welcome back.
Hey, good to be here. Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound great. Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Yeah, for a while I had both your broadcast and this going, and I was hearing double voice, so I realized I had to close the broadcast to join. Hey, it's good to be here. Dr. Ross, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to see you again. It's been
Good to
many
see you
years.
again, too.
I believe the one and only time we met was at a Subway
Yes.
sandwich shop. After I appeared on your show, you were out of town. You had just come back from a trip and met us for lunch and had a very good time together. So appreciate it.
Well, thank you for writing that article for us, too. We appreciated that.
So let's bring Gary a little bit of it when it comes to like the ad hoc Young Earth Creationist models. We've already discussed, how helium diffusion rates are not chronologically accurate. They're not ways of actually dating anything. They're just telling you how much helium in there. But when it comes to like these ad hoc astronomy things, Gary, how desperate would Young Earth Creationists, to you be in order, like as Dr. Ross pointed out, these things are in transit. They're not going to be fixed. They're not solvent. They're not able to actually correct anything that they have for their presupposition because it's scientifically untenable. Yet we still have Young Earth Creationists out there going, oh yeah, the Earth must be 6,000 years old. And as Hugh pointed out before you got here, they use very complicated things to try to, I think, obfuscate and try to confuse the masses. I'm having Dr. Hancock back on just shortly in a couple weeks to talk about biology stuff that the Young Earth Creation was like, oh, look, here's all this biology. And he's like, that's just an argument from incredulity. There's no actual evidence there. So how about you kind of address that a little bit for the young creationists out there?
Yeah, I think with the Starlight in Time, an interesting point, and you might be interested in this. After the papers by Connor and Page, there's a paper by Fackrell and McIntosh. And if you read that paper closely, they were two of the three peer reviewers of Humphrey's paper. And when I saw that, I decided to contact Dr. Fackrell. And we had a dialogue, an email exchange for several years. And he was very candid. The paper failed its own peer review. And that's actually very, I've come to learn that is actually rather common, more common than you'd think in the Young Earth creation world. But Humphrey's paper failed its own peer review.
From their own creationist.
Yeah. The Journal of Creation, or then it was called Creation Ex Nihilo Technical Journal. But it failed its own review. And Dr. Fackrell had an interesting story, how he and Dr. McIntosh unambiguously recommended rejection of that paper. There was a third reviewer who had kind of changed his mind on it, and the editor, Andrew Snelling, decided to publish anyway, even though 2 out of 3 reviewers had rejected it.
Yeah,
Snelling has a geology background, so he is in no position to judge on those things. And some of the things that Fackrell and McIntosh said are just absolutely scathing. If I can pull up.
Well, I got to meet Dr. Fackrell when I was at the University of Sydney.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. So he heard me speak there. We got to talk for quite a while. He's a very accomplished mathematical physicist, completely fluent in the theory of general relativity. And I know he was really upset at how Humphreys responded to Don Page, because Fackrell knew Don Page.
Yeah.
And that to me was upsetting personally, just how he was so dismissive of people that are world-renowned experts in the theory of general relativity.
Humphreys is pretty dismissive of anybody who isn't Humphreys. I mean, he's very cordial when you get to, I guess, to a certain point. But it took me a long time to even get to that point with Humphreys. He was very dismissive of me. He was argumentative and very, I would say, vile in some ways. But I was being very cordial to him for a very long time, and so we have a rapport. And I know, like, Gary, you've talked to Humphreys, and you guys seem to have a
we've
rapport.
had lunch a few times, and I would agree. At a certain level, he can be a pleasant person to be with. It's very strange. It's almost surreal. He can be very pleasant, and then it's almost like his pride and ego take over. And
do you think it's because they have to have that presupposition first? Do you think it's because they have cognitive dissonance? I really do, and I don't know if you watched it, but Gutsick Gibbons had made a really brilliant video on Lisle and related it to cognitive dissonance. That I think that is the case. I think that a lot of younger creationists have these conflicting beliefs because they, as quote scientists, have to try to reconcile this position that seems untenable in science is their faith, that their faith has to come first, rather than going, hey, if my faith is true, maybe God's using science this way. Maybe this is how he wants me to understand the universe, and then go that path. But they don't go that path. They go the path, I start with, this has to be true, and anything that goes against that scientifically means the science is wrong, but that seems to be untenable as a scientist.
Well, they even apply that to their study of the Bible, and they're not willing to admit that they're misinterpreting the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, as we talked earlier, the Bible's explicit. The laws of physics have not changed. And yet their model critically depends on that, but they're so confident that their interpretation of the Bible is correct that they're saying any other interpretation of the Bible has got to be a failed
even if everyone dies, even if the planet can't exist, it's okay. It's okay. We'll figure it out. We'll work on that. And that's what I've noticed with young creationists. They're like, okay, come up with the accelerated nuclear decay. Once they can't get that to work, they're like, well, we'll come up with some other things, because even if they got that to work, it raises other problems.
Well, they do that with evolution too. They don't call it evolution. They call it diversification of species.
Yeah.
But they really need the evolution to be highly accelerated by at least a factor of 10,000 times to make their models work. And yet, I don't know of an atheist evolutionist on the planet that would ever agree that speciation happens with that degree of rapidity or efficiency.
I was reading something on pachyderms, and they were basically, it came out that they would have to have a speciation event, literally like multiple times per generation. It would just be so ridiculous, the hyperspeciation, to account for 7 or 8 million extant species, as from like 4,000 from the ark. It's just mathematically untenable. Yeah. But when you start talking about the maths, and you say, hey, look, if you want us to accept your position, show us the maths. But I notice they don't ever have mathematics that actually makes sense. They, Dr. Ross has pointed out, Humphrey's had some massive mistakes in his general relativity understandings or mathematics. And just people that are experts, they're able to point that out, but the lay people cannot look at that math and go, yeah, he made a mistake. Now, when Gary was on and we talked about his math there, it was there. I mean, you just had to know about logarithm and math. And yet it was so simple. And he still fought against it, which I will never understand, because at that point it's like, why are you trying to convince people that don't understand high school math that you didn't make a mistake when it's right there black and white?
Well, I think he's counting on the fact that a lot of lay people have forgotten their high school math.
But isn't that dishonest? I mean, I don't understand why. And I'm just going to be blunt here. Christianity is supposed to be, the position where, there's truth, right? I mean, they're the ultimate truth. That's the foundation for reality, so to speak. That's the base level. I'm fine with that position. I mean, I don't agree with it, but I mean, I get it. But for a younger creationist to then say, I'm okay with lying in order to promote this position, how is that reconcilable with the Christian worldview? It just seems to me it's not.
Well, Steve, they never admit to lying, but they are presuppositionalists. They begin with a presupposition. My reading of the Bible tells me your Earth and universe have to be younger than 10,000 years. That's my foundational starting point. Mm-hmm. I'm never going to question that. Everything else must be interpreted in that context. And if you begin with that kind of presuppositional perspective, you're not willing to recognize that there's contradictions, there's intractable problems, there's lies going on. They're oblivious to this.
Yeah,
it's all founded on their presuppositional philosophical view of Scripture.
So what prevents them from moving to more of an old Earth creationist point of view?
Well, I've seen a number of young Earth creationists abandon their position because most young Earth creationists have a very high respect for the Bible. They take it literally. They take it consistently. So when you show them Bible passages that contradict their young Earth belief, they say, I was wrong. And they no longer take a young Earth position. I found the most effective way to do that is to show them Bible passages that explicitly state there's been no change in the laws of physics. They see those passages and say, hey, it was written by Paul. It was written by Jeremiah. It was written by Moses. I believe those people. It's in the Bible. I have to stand by the Bible. So for most young Earth creationists, you can make headway.
You know what? I actually don't take umbrage with that, because even though I think that people should be, go by the obvious data and the evidence and science, if somebody has got to a position where they're they're being unreasonable in their belief system, but they do believe, very strongly in a particular thing like the Bible. Then you come along and use that to show them that maybe their foundations are not as strong as they think they are, and change their mind. I'm perfectly, fine with that. I had a debate with Wayne Fillmore, as you remember, and Wayne Fillmore left Young Earth Creationism. I mean, we had a discussion on Macroevolution. He realized, hey, maybe I'm not getting correct information from Young Earth Creationists. He looked into it, later on became an adjunct science teacher or assistant science teacher for a little while, and left Young Earth Creationism. He's still an old creationist. He has the utmost respect for you, and he's still a Christian. Nothing's changed as far as that.
Well, Steve, a good percentage of our Reasons to Believe constituency are people that were Young Earth creationists, looked at the biblical text and said, hey, I'm with Reasons to Believe.
Yeah, no, and I could definitely see why. Like I said, I think people should practice what they preach. I've always seen RTB be very respectful. I've had a great rapport with them. Absolutely, every time I've ever been involved with anything with RTB and talking to you all, it has been nothing but the greatest experience. I mean, it is really a pleasure to have people from the RTB on and scholars on and be able to have access to such level of knowledge. It still blows me away, to be honest with you. I'm humbled by it. So I do really much appreciate you taking time to come on to talk about these things, because again, I want to change the minds of people that have the science wrong. I'm not here to convince anybody that religion's right or wrong or Christianity is true or false. It's not my dominion. I happen to like science. I happen to like philosophy, and using both of them together to explain to people that their foundational philosophical understandings and their scientific understandings are fundamentally flawed, I think is a group effort from all sides. Yeah. I know. The audience may want to ask some questions. We got about 15 minutes because we want to only do this for an hour because that's what we agreed on to begin with, and I always have to keep to those parameters. But Gary, what else you want to add on this? Because again, I know you've had direct dealings with a lot of these young Earth creationist PhDs that have used science, I think, to willfully mislead people. I will stand by that. I think it's more than just dishonesty. I think it's outright deception for them to maintain their worldview, because I think they do try to confuse lay people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one of the sobering things in the Bible is you look at, let's say, the life of Jesus, the life of Paul. Their biggest opposition came from religious people. And that's in the historical narrative of the Bible. The plot of the Gospels wouldn't exist without the scribes and Pharisees. And
that's a good point.
There's been this element of religious hypocrisy. And in a lot of ways you see, if you make a list of the behaviors of the scribes and Pharisees and some of the things you see in Young Earth creationism, you can almost make a direct correlation between the Pharisees were very adamant about particular details of the Mosaic law, and yet they missed the big picture. Jesus would use these pictures. You strain the gnat, but you swallow the camel. You obsess over a detail in your text, but you miss the weightier matters, the first of which is justice, which to me means you treat people fairly. Just like my attempts to get things published in the Journal of Creation or Creation Research Society Quarterly. I would argue that it was a biased review, that Humphrey's was held to a low standard and I was held to an impossible standard.
Even though you're both Christians, you're on the same side on that. It's just, you're talking about a difference on the age of a planet or the universe,
Right. There's no fairness. But what does the Bible say? Jesus said the weightier matter is justice. So that says the most important thing is not what I believe about the age of the earth, but how I treat people.
Yeah, and I happen to agree with you on that.
That's very fundamental in the teachings of Jesus Christ. Paul said in Romans chapter 2, you who boast in the law, do you dishonor God by breaking the law?
And
God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you.
I have seen a distinct difference. I have a multiple correspondence with multiple Young Earth creationists, PhDs. I could tell you right here, for a fact, the type of discussions between having with you all and them, completely different. Again, it took me a long time to even get, ingratiated with Humphreys. They seem to know. I'm not saying that I know what they believe, but it seems to me they seem to deep down inside know there's major problems with their models, and they seem to get angry when those are pointed out by people that they deem unworthy enough to have a discussion with, and they just kind of blow them off. And yet when I notice the other side, like with you all, you'll talk about anything. You're like, okay, let's discuss that. Let's talk about the science. You're not afraid to confront those difficult questions. And I think that maybe younger creationists come across as angry sometimes because they deep down know there's some major issues, but they can't reconcile it in their head.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, I mean, that's an insecurity, right? That's sign of an insecurity, because if what I believe is the truth, go ahead and throw anything you can at it. Just like in science, the best hypothesis is one that you throw multiple objections at,
right?
And it wins every time.
Yeah, it makes it bulletproof after a while.
That's what gives you the confidence.
Yeah.
In engineering, like doing reliability tests, you try and break the part, you try and fail it, and you run it through all the things that could destroy it. And if it survives, then you feel like, I can go to market with this. So in the world, put the things that you believe in to the test, because if you're right, you'll win. And if you're wrong, then you'll learn something. Yeah, no,
by the way, I am the exact same way. I have people telling me like, oh, Steve's wrong. I'm like, okay, demonstrate this. And then I've said, my claim is I've demonstrated something. For example, when I write something philosophically speaking, I use some basic, very simple logic. And I say, look, this is my evidence. This is my argument. This is my claim. I'm standing by this. And I believe this is a demonstration. It's QED. And they'll say, well, you haven't demonstrated anything. I'm like, but this is the argument. This is the logic. I mean, how is that not a demonstration? And so I think when you have the younger creationists putting this information out to the masses out there, they don't really want people to question it much. They don't want people to go, but hey, you actually made some errors here, or this isn't quite correct, because I think they feel like they're personally attacked when people do that. Yet at the same time, I don't feel personal attack when people says I'm wrong. I'm just saying, okay, what is it I'm wrong about? Demonstrate it. But they never do. Not once. Not a single solitary time has anybody showed my logic being incorrect. No, never. At least one of my arguments out there. So, kind of to wrap it up, when we have these models, like when Lisle puts out the Anisotropic Synchrony Convention, how would you explain to a young Earth creationist about why what he's putting out cannot be demonstrated, nor should it be taken as parsimonious, or why should it not be even utilized in observational astronomy? Because I think that's the kind of the core of this discussion is, sure, they have, Lisle has this alternative model, but why use it? What advantage does it give, and does it present more problems?
Right. Well, first I have a question for Hugh. You might know the answer to this. One of the techniques for measuring the speed of light, and this was very common in the later part of the 19th century, was the Bradley method, which was based upon the aberration of light. And it was, you look at the deflection of a starlight towards the polar region, and it changes as the Earth moves around its orbit. And the reason it was so popular back at that time, because it was based purely on angle measurements. It had nothing to do with clocks. And from that, you've inferred fairly accurately the speed of light. It eventually came out of favor, because when clocks became more accurate, it was better than that which had the astronomical difficulties. But at the time, it was pretty good, and it was based upon angles, not clocks. So how does Jason deal with the Bradley method?
Well, that's a good question, because again, I mean, last time I debated him, he says, Hugh, you need to understand, I'm not an evidentialist. I'm a presuppositionalist. So it begins with a presupposition that the universe must be thousands of years old.
Right.
So he would dismiss the method because it doesn't fit his presupposition. Just
but
like
how does it?
Yeah.
But how does an infinite inbound speed of light explain the Bradley measurement? I mean, there is. You can measure this offset,
and that goes back to the 18th century, right?
Many, many times.
Well,
and
Gary,
there's.
I also
go
challenge Jason on the fact that we do have these very distant supernovae that are gravitationally lensed, and you get multiple gravitational lenses in a galaxy cluster, which means you get different angles of the travel path. And what I learned is he's changed his model. His original model was the velocity of light is infinite towards the center of the Earth. He's now saying it's infinite towards all instruments and all observers, no matter where they are.
Now, he
didn't get around the aberration argument. But the problem with that is it basically implies nothing we measure in astronomy is trustworthy. And I think he's okay with that because he's not an evidentialist.
Mm-hmm.
He's a
Mm-hmm.
hyper-presuppositionalist. And he admits that to his audience.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. You're going to trust your own observations at that point. I forgot what was it. Oh yeah, this was around the 18th century that they kind of got very close to the speed of light just by angular measurements, right? I mean, so this is direct observations. It doesn't require any fancy math for that. But as you pointed out, Lisle puts in all these presuppositions that require much greater mathematics that have no use. I mean, why would you make something more complicated if the math, for example, Hugh, if he wants to argue that everywhere in the universe that you have an observer, light is infinite toward you, wouldn't he have to use like really complicated Galilean or Lorentz transformations to make something like that work?
Well, again, it's similar to the analogy I gave you earlier. Can you really trust all the memories in your brain? Maybe you just think you're 50 years of age. Maybe all those memories were implanted there to make you think that you had all those experiences in your past life.
That's kind of what it is. It just basically is, okay, it's untestable. It's a philosophical possibility, but it doesn't mean it's plausible.
To debate these people is they're not willing to trust any experiment or observation. They only trust their presupposition.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right.
Which means their presupposition can never be challenged.
Yep.
And so how can you pin them down? Now, where I think this is helpful is they're reaching an audience that tends to have some level of trust in evidence, in observations, in experiments. The vast majority of young Earth creationists I meet are very uncomfortable with a hyper-presuppositional approach. It's like, I can really trust what's coming through my senses. And doesn't the Bible tell me I can trust what I measure about the outside world around me?
Yeah.
We were saying earlier in the show, doesn't Paul actually scathe Gnostic philosophy in Colossians and Galatians? He tells us explicitly this idea that we can only trust the spirit realm and not the physical realm. That's an anathema. That's something we Christians should reject. And you go back to Psalm 19. God gave us two trustworthy books, the book of nature and the book of scripture. And I like to tell Christian audiences, if you're a student of the Bible, you have to be a theologian. Don't leave it up to the PhD level theologians, but you also have to be a scientist. Science is way too much fun to only let those with doctoral degrees study it.
Yeah.
It's fun, it reveals truth, and therefore, if we're a serious follower of Jesus Christ, we need to be a scientist and a theologian, and not just a philosophical hyper-presuppositionalist. And so, as I talk to people like Jason Lisle, make the point, hey, the Bible is basically refuting your hyper-presuppositional approach.
Right.
And therefore, if you really claim to be a student of Scripture, like whenever I debate him, he always throws up the Bible and says, this is what I trust. Well, if you really trust it, you would be forced to abandon your hyper-presuppositional apologetics and begin to trust what we can measure and observe through the tools of studying the book of nature.
Yeah, because there's no theologian that would actually read the Bible and go, yeah, the earth is young. You couldn't derive that from that. There's no possible way. I mean, you have to just come up with that presupposition on your own, because it's nothing you can read the Bible and go, oh, the earth is only 4,000 years old. It just wouldn't work that way. Somebody in the live chat said that's because you've never heard of creationism with the appearance of age. Yes, of course I have. That's, again, Omphalos hypothesis, which is a philosophical interesting thing. If we were born with all our memories, we could have just came into existence yesterday with all our memories fully intact. Sure, that is literally logically possible, but is it nomologically sound? No. Is it something that we should even entertain? Probably not. It's just a philosophical thing. But we all have presuppositions, but we have to ask ourselves, are presuppositions parsimonious what we observe? And it wouldn't be parsimonious to say, hey, look, we came into existence yesterday. We have to make presuppositions that there is a past, right? And that past.
When young Earth creationists talk about the appearance of age, they're saying that God imposed age on the universe that's not real. But when we astronomers look out at the universe, we don't see that. We see astronomical objects having ages that range from 0 all the way up to 13 billion years. Mm-hmm. If the young Earth creationist paradigm was correct, all the ages would be falling within a narrow window of time ages. They don't. They spread over 13 billion years. And so I know that the universe can't be extremely old because there's no black dwarf stars. Stars haven't had time yet to completely burn out. So the universe can't be quadrillions of years old. It's only billions of years old.
Based upon current modeling, obviously.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so the appeal to appearance of age is refuted by the very observations that we astronomers make. We see things that measure to be young. We see things that measure to be middle age. We see things that measure to be old, and nothing that's extremely old.
Yeah, and again, if we're looking at a galaxy that's 13 billion light years away, and all of a sudden Dr. Lisle is saying, "Oh, we're seeing that as it is," and I'm not exaggerating. He literally is saying we're seeing it in real time. I mean, instantaneously, a photon's leaving that galaxy and hitting our eye. And by the way, to the photon, it actually is instantaneous, but it's interesting side fact.
The problem with that, Steve, that very distant galaxy measures to be very young.
Yeah. Yeah,
the
exactly.
Galaxies all around our Milky Way.
Should we be seeing them old? Why are we seeing them in their very embryonic stages, which again would be like what we would expect if our current understanding of modeling is true? We would expect to, as we look further back, we are essentially looking back in time, and that's what we see. All observation seems to point for this.
Yeah, all the distant galaxies measure young. None of them measure old.
Yeah, I think he's just. I think what they do is they exploit things because as you pointed out, Lisle's convention is not against physics. I mean, the convention is it would work mathematically, and it would work if you wanted to utilize it, but it doesn't get you anywhere. Matter of fact, it just goes. It flies in the face of everything we actually do know, and would create more problems. So it seems like he's using. A fact that we cannot measure the one-way speed of light scientifically, experimentally. Okay, fine, but we do understand that if his convention is what we want to use, which you could, it just exponentially makes astronomy way more difficult to explain.
A number of astronomers have tried to point out to him, forget about your ACS theory. What do you do with white dwarf stars? They all have cooling times that vary over a period of 6 billion years. I mean, that's completely independent of what's ever going on.
Well, how many years would it take for Humphrey's model? Because, I mean, I remember he had something, I don't know what the hell he meant by this. I really don't. But he said something about a ball of water. Like the universe started with a ball of water. And It was like 2 light years across. And then that exploded. And I think that's what he said. Exploded and then became a white dwarf. And yet every model that I've ever seen would require like trillion years or something. It's some ridiculous amount. How does he reconcile that? And I don't know what he meant by the ball of water thing.
To put the whole mass of the universe into a 2 light year diameter, it's impossible that you would have liquid water.
But that's what he claimed, isn't it?
Can't exist.
But isn't that what he claimed?
Yeah.
I don't understand how that. See, I don't get white hole cosmology. I can understand Lisle's argument. I think it's non-parsimonious, but it's nothing earth-shattering. It's 100 years ago they could have they knew this, But I don't understand white hole cosmology at all. I don't understand how Humphreys even thinks it makes sense.
The reason he appealed to the white hole cosmology, he wanted extreme gravitational time dilation.
That's what he was going for.
Yeah. That's what he was going for. And he conveniently ignored the velocity time dilation, which actually goes the opposite direction of what he wants.
Well, I tell you what, we are at the hour. I'm going to leave you with this. I'm going to let you both gentlemen, say whatever you want to the audience and let them know where they can find you and your work. Like I said, I'm humbled to have both of you on. You two are two of my favorite doctors of your respective fields. I have the utmost respect for both of you. And I'll read this comment to you, then I'll let you guys wrap it up. But one of our long subscribers, Raisin Girl, she says this, and this is to Dr. Ross. She says, I just want to say thank you to Dr. Ross. Something he said shifted my world in 2016. Everything else aside, I'm grateful for that. And as always to you as well, Steve. Thank you, Raisin Girl. And I think that kind of sums up a lot of my audience. A lot of my audience, again, are pretty atheistic. But when they have a Christian comes on that's willing to talk about the subjects and do so articulately and so informed, everything kind of goes by the wayside on that. It's more about the subject and the science than it is about whether God exists or not. And I think that those are the best kind of conversations to have. And I respect the older creationists for doing that, because the younger, they don't seem to do that very much. So anyways, let me have Gary say first, and I'll leave Dr. Ross to give us a summation. But Gary, what do you got for us? Anything?
Just briefly to chime in a little bit on what Humphreys did. The best way that I've understood the work is he did a coordinate transformation, which if you follow one of the principles of relativity, the outcome what you predict is not a function of the coordinates system you use. You can describe things Cartesian, cylindrical, spherical. You get the same fundamental answer. And the very fact he says, I do this coordinate transformation, I get a different outcome, that tells you right away it's wrong.
100% agree.
What Connor and Page did, they basically said, okay, if we take your coordinate system and do the math correctly, you get the same answer. But what Humphreys was able to do by going to a coordinate system that was very complex, he could misinterpret things in that coordinate system and come up with these fallacious claims.
So a good analogy.
Fundamentally, you transform the coordinates, you don't get a different answer.
Yeah.
That's inherent in relativity. That's one of the foundational principles, that your answer is not dependent upon the coordinate system.
Yeah. So a good analogy, I think, using Galilean, so non-relativistic, or Lorentzian, you're using relativistic. A good analogy would be, if I wanted to make the Earth the center of the universe using mathematical transformations, I could easily mathematically do that. It shouldn't change anything with the physics, absolutely nothing. But I got to tell you, if you look at the mathematics for making the Earth the center of how all the bodies move around it, it's very, 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 very complicated.
Exactly.
And so it's not parsimonious, because as you said, you get the same answer if you just make the sun the center of the solar system, and then the Earth goes around that. It's a lot more convenient than having the sun go around the Earth, or the Earth, the universe, going around the Earth, because why make things so complicated when it doesn't need to be? You should get the same results with the transformation, correct?
Yeah, but because he makes it more complex just through the mathematical transformation, he's able to misinterpret it.
Yeah, and again, I think it's deceptive to lay people.
He misinterprets it. And if you go through Connor and Page, and it their work was just tedious. But it's one of those, I knew the answer before they did it. I know fundamentally you do the coordinate transformation, you're going to get the same answer. And what they did, they went through the coordinate transformation and followed all the math, and they got the same answer, just like relativity said you would.
Shocking.
So, but it's because in this more complex coordinate system, it allows itself for misinterpretation. And Humphreys was able to capitalize on that. And again, for his audience, you get lost in this transformation and you don't know what's what. And he says, well, this is the right way. It's this Klein metric, not this other one. And the bottom line is, if they both are solutions to Einstein's field equations, they're both right. And if you do the math right, you get the same answer both ways.
And that's takeaway.
Bottom line.
Yeah, you don't have to know the math. You just have to know that any transformation should give you the same results. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right.
It's very simple.
Yeah. So Dr. Ross, once again, you're one of my favorite guests. You know that I am really thrilled to have you on every single time, and your organization has been so amazing to get you on, to come on to the Non-Sequitur Show, and we're definitely gonna have you on again. So what do you want to leave the audience as far as like your organization? What do you got going on, and to kind of sum up this topic as a whole, especially to the young creationists watching, because we do have an influx of them, and a lot of them just have never been exposed to the other side. They just are convinced that the youngest model has to be true, and they haven't seen the books that you've read about. By the way, I do have.
Well, for your Young Earth viewers and listeners,
books. I got books.
The Bible tells us that we need to integrate across all of God's revelation the entirety of the book of nature, which means you don't just look at one scientific discipline. Astrophysics needs to be integrated with evolutionary biology, with paleontology, with genetics, if you want to understand the history of life. Well, likewise, we need to integrate all of the book of Scripture. It's not just Genesis. There's 66 books. And so if you take the Bible literally and consistently, this is how you can interpret the creation text in the Bible. That's what Reasons to Believe is founded on. It's founded on the two books principle. And yes, I've written a ton on these different subjects. You'll find tens of thousands of articles at reasons.org. We have a search engine so you can find what you want to look for. And I think I just finished my 22nd book on science and faith. People got questions. I do take questions on my Facebook page and my Twitter page. So they're welcome to engage me there or to engage us at reasons.org. And if they want free chapters of my books, they can get free chapters at reasons.org/Ross.
And if you guys email me, I'll forward any questions you have. he was been so amazing of his time. He's always gotten back to me, and it's you don't even know what I'm feeling to have such access to such educated people on these topics. Because again, as a layperson, I have to go read this stuff and try to figure it out myself. I have a minimal education. I mean, I've got some college, and I do have background in nuclear stuff, but that's nothing compared to what you need to know for these types of topics. And so, when people say, well, this is their position and this is their evidence, I'm not at all qualified to evaluate that, but I do have experts that are. The next week, I'm going to have one on when it comes to biology. We're going to be talking about proteomics. We're going to talk about common ancestry. We're going to talk about some of the young Earth creationists, kind of just throwing these arguments out there about topamaze and other things they find really nifty, but they unfortunately don't have the evidence that it supports young Earth creationism. And that's one thing that this channel is always going to be against. It has nothing to do with theology, in my opinion. It has to do with, does the science show a young Earth or old Earth? Clearly it shows a young. Actually it shows the Earth. Somebody's going to quote me on that one. Steve said the Earth is young. Yeah. But anyways, I do want to thank you both. Too, right? And flat, yes. The Earth is flat. Haven't you heard? We'll have that on the next show. But I do want to thank my audience. I want to thank my mods and people that support the channel. If you want to become a member of the channel, please hit join. If you want to leave a comment, and you can put a donation there. I read them out every time I go on air. If there's a thank you on that. So I want to thank, again, both of you. And we'll call it a night. How's that sound? So thank you guys very much. And thanks for watching the Non Sequitur Show. And good night.